Good afternoon. Attorney Protective would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Time Flies, Overcoming Procrastination to Reduce the Risk of Malpractice. With that, I would like to introduce you to your first speaker, Erin.
Thanks so much, Michelle, and happy Wednesday, everyone. I am Erin McCartney, and I head the risk management and marketing team at Attorney Protective. And I'm one of your speakers here today on the risks that poor management time skills can pose for your law firm and overcoming procrastination to reduce the risk of malpractice. Your other speaker, Meg Spencer Dixon, is both a lawyer and consultant specializing in time, project, and stress management for lawyers. I've been privileged to hear Meg speak several times, and I know you will profit from her insights today. Time management remains a vibrant topic for lawyers, especially in the midst of a post-pandemic world where many of us are still working with new challenges and new locations. Me personally, I work from home. I also have 4 kids, so between that dreaded phone call from the school nurse that my child just threw up in the playground and I need to come get them, or having an unexpected pipe burst during a scheduled meeting, my time management skills are constantly being put to the test, which has really highlighted just how important having good time management skills is and confirms that I continue to be a work in progress. That being said, with every new tip I learn, implement, and then master, I get a little better at balancing all of the demands on my time. Megan, my goal today is to hopefully give you some new tips that will help you do the same. For most lawyers, our product is our knowledge and our time. The majority of lawyers still bill in time increments, even with the evolution of flat rate billing and other billing innovations. Even for plaintiffs' lawyers who are paid on a contingent fee basis, effectively managing their time is an important component of delivering quality service to their client and competent, even exceptional results on their matters. Lawyers who develop good time management skills are likely to do things like have documents and work product organized more efficiently, complete tasks quicker and more importantly in a sufficient time before deadlines, have a better work-life balance, complete more work in less hours, bill time more efficiently, and make a more positive impression on clients. Wouldn't we all like to be good at these things? Good time management skills will not only reduce your stress and make your practice more enjoyable, but they will improve your bottom line. And as we are about to talk about, they can minimize certain risks to your practice. I'm going to start out by highlighting a few of the risks that poor time management skills pose to your firm. There are so many risks to your practice posed by poor time management. Things like not having enough clients, like getting paid for less than 30% of the work you actually do, like having to spend time in front of your disciplinary board, like getting sued for malpractice, and like constantly worrying whether something got done or asking for forgiveness from clients, judges, and even your firm because you were late. None of these are positive, and good time management skills can help save most of these kinds of risks. So missed deadlines. We're first going to talk about that because missed deadlines are a leading cause of ethical violations and legal malpractice suits and are one of the risks of poor time management. Missed deadlines have been the leading cause of malpractice claims as long as the ABA has been tracking the data. 3 other top causes of claims also relate to time management, including failure to calendar properly, failure to file documents where there's no deadline, and failure to react to calendar. Missed deadlines includes procrastination, as well as the more obvious mistake of not filing within the statute of limitations. The consequences of missing a single deadline can be severe, and often the damage to the client is irreversible. If you miss a key deadline in a case and it loses valuable rights for your client, what do you think they will do? Will they sue you? From my experience, it's likely. Missed deadlines can happen for a variety of reasons, including not having an adequate calendaring system or straying outside your area of competence or expertise. With the pandemic, we saw more and more lawyers taking cases outside their expertise because they're trying to keep their practice alive. Let me share with you an example of a case that involved a claim involving a missed deadline and practicing outside an area of expertise. There was a very distressed lawyer who contacted the malpractice carrier, advising that he thought he had missed the statute of limitations on a wrongful death case. To make things worse, it was a friend from church whose family was impacted by the death. This lawyer did no personal injury work, but felt compelled to help his friend when asked. What happened is more typical than you might imagine. The matter became the dusty file on his credenza, mainly because he was out of his element and didn't really know how to handle it. Probably most days when he came in, he thought about the file but did nothing. Finally, he picked it up and panicked because he believed the statute of limitations had run. Needless to say, he was very upset. He had let his friend down and didn't know how to tell him. Luckily, he called his malpractice carrier and got them involved. As he relayed the facts, there was a glimmer of hope. The individual who had died did not die immediately after the accident. So his malpractice carrier quickly called local attorney who did specialize in PI, and they were able to transfer the matter to local counsel to handle and were able to save the case. This one ended well, but that is not the most common result. There are a lot of lessons we can learn from this claim, but one certainly is how dangerous procrastination can be. And in my experience handling malpractice claims, I can share that usually when confronted with a situation that might result in a malpractice claim, because of a missed deadline or inexperience, most lawyers, understandably, do not know what to do. Many bury their heads in the sand and ignore the situation or try and fix the problem on their own. Both are not smart moves. In this case, the insured lawyer took advantage of his policy's pre-claim assistance coverage, and it saved the day, so to speak. So if you find yourself in a pickle when it comes to missing a deadline, keep in mind that your insurance policy may offer claim repair assistance or possibly a hotline where you can talk to another attorney to help mitigate a problem or missed deadline error before it becomes a bigger issue. I know Attorney Protective offers these resources, and they have saved many attorneys from a malpractice claim because we're able to get ahead of the error and involve local defense counsel to mitigate the situation before it evolves into an actual malpractice claim. So we talked about missed deadlines and how one of the most, if not the most, frequent causes of malpractice claims continues to be missed statute of limitations or other deadlines. So what are some things we can do to avoid missed deadlines or important timelines altogether? Well, most errors could have easily been avoided by the proper use of a calendaring system. When it comes to your calendar, the goal is to create a calendaring system that's reliable, efficient, and user-friendly. An effective system includes all of the work in the office and all of the time out of the office, such as holidays and vacations. The best system will be one that you and your staff can efficiently use together. A complicated system that's difficult to operate will not benefit your practice. Your system will only be as good as the information entered into it, so it's imperative that you find a calendaring system that everyone finds simple to use. Calendaring systems should include a system to tickle deadlines and file reviews. These tickle dates should include a reminder notice before the actual event so that enough time is allotted to complete the work before it's due. Deadlines for approaching statute of limitation, filings, discovery, and other work-intensive activities should have multiple reminders to ensure timely completion before the event date. With calendaring systems, it's not one size fits all. If you have a solo practice, you probably won't have a docket clerk other than you to track these deadlines. So designing a system for a solo with the right safety net will be different than how you would design it for a larger firm with a designated docketing clerk. But in either case, it should involve at least 2 calendars or systems that remind you independently of all deadlines. There is basic computer calendaring, Outlook, Google Calendar, things like that. They can be a good choice for solo or smaller firms. And then there's case management software, and that's designed specifically for law firms, and it can be tailored to meet the firm's specific needs. A desktop calendar is often used as a backup system. If you use a manual system as a backup calendar, be sure that all dates are included so nothing will be overlooked should your main system fail. It's also important to calendar enough lead time for the completion of tasks that is well ahead of actual deadlines. Again, what works for one person will not necessarily work for all. What works for me is to block an appropriate amount of time on my Outlook calendar for tasks that allow me to complete the task at least 1 week before it's due. If ticklers and reminders are not enough to motivate you to complete work on a file timely, schedule appointment time on your calendar to complete work. I suggest scheduling appointments with files. Treat appointments with files as seriously as appointments with clients. If you need to reschedule an appointment with a file, do so as diligently as you would with a client. Keeping file work up to date through appointments can be a vital part of malpractice avoidance. A best practice tip for time management that works for me is come in every day and do the thing you want to do on your desk the very least first. And if you do that, your day will only get better from there. And it's so true. So next, let's talk about losing business. This is another risk of poor time management. You will definitely lose business because of procrastination or lack of diligence. There are many studies that prove this to be true. For example, there are some statistics on the slide of a study of in-house counsel that found that poor service is the number 2 reason for filing a law firm. On the reverse side, AVO found that the number 1 reason consumers hired a lawyer was their responsiveness. And since we know existing clients are the source of 80% of future business, satisfying current clients on all aspects of your service, including diligence and promptness, is very, very important to the sustainability of your practice. And I think as consumers, we can all relate to this. There are many impactful statistics on the high value of client retention to your practice. And we also know that firms that retain 98% of their clients from year to year are twice as profitable as those that retain 94% of their clients. It's amazing how that small percentage difference in retention adds up to big dollars. Also, we know that new client acquisition costs 15 times more than retaining an existing client. No matter what statistic you read on client retention, the message is the same. Client retention is vitally important to your practice. So on the next slide, we have a few cases. I'm only going to highlight one of them, the Nettleton case. In Nettleton, the lawyer was found liable for malpractice where he intentionally caused his client's cause of action to be dismissed because he was unprepared. He was too busy, he didn't manage his caseload, and was not prepared to go to trial because he was working on another trial. We can't expect clients to be understanding about us being overloaded. Think about it this way. If you walk into a store and you cannot get help or there's a long line at checkout, it's frustrating. You will often leave without buying something, or if you wait, you will form a negative opinion about the store. Opinions like they don't care about my business, or they are terribly unorganized, or their staff is poorly trained. Aren't clients' expectations of service from you even higher than service in retail settings? And just like in the Nettleton case, we put ourselves under tremendous stress situations by not managing our workload and our time adequately. And I think most of us want to avoid that. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about damaged reputation as a risk. Certainly, getting sued for malpractice or having a disciplinary complaint can injure your reputation, particularly with current and potential clients. Warren Buffett has been quoted as saying, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently." And he's right. Clients will judge you on the things they can. Clients cannot always judge whether you did a better job than the lawyer down the street or charged less than she would have, but they can judge you on things like how they are treated or what your office looks like and their perception of helpfulness and competence of your staff. Timeliness is another one of those things on which clients can and will judge you. If you're chronically late getting things done, get them done later than they thought you would, or later than you told them that you would. They see it, and they will judge you on it. Just as important, the failure to timely complete tasks or promptly communicate with your clients causes clients to lose trust in you. I think many of us miss the connection between the lack of timeliness and lack of trust, but it is even addressed in the ethical rules. And don't forget that a dissatisfied client typically will tell 10 to 17 other people, and the story they tell can become your reputation to a much wider audience of prospective clients. Again, as consumers, I think we can all relate to this. So next, lost revenue, like losing business, is a risk of poor time management. There are lots of studies that demonstrate how much time lawyers lose by not billing promptly. The sooner lawyers record their time, the more details they tend to provide, and the more billable time they remember to include, all help to avoid lost revenue. What happens if a lawyer doesn't record her time contemporaneously with the work being done? If the lawyer tries to reconstruct her time weekly, she will lose 25% to 30% of her time. If the lawyer instead tries to reconstruct her time monthly, she can lose as much as 55 to 70% of her time. Wow, that's a lot of time. Those lost hours and the revenue they represent are compelling reasons to develop the good habit of contemporaneous billing. So some best practice tips here. You can keep track of your time in different ways, but it's essential to record the time you spend on work tasks as soon as you do them. You can use a legal pad, a billing program, or even your smartphone to do this. Additionally, you can estimate the amount of time a task will take before starting it. Knowing how long you expect to take on a task will help you stay on track and avoid underestimating or overestimating the amount of time a particular task will take. The most important thing is to be consistent in keeping track of your time. This way, records will be accurate. Also, enter time daily. The more frequently you track your time, the better odds of capturing an accurate picture of your work daily. One way to ensure that you track your time daily is to make it a habit. You can do this by setting aside a specific time each day to review your time entries and update your timesheet, which will help you stay on top of your work and ensure that your billing records are accurate. Timekeeping and billing software makes this as seamless as possible. Single tasking also works really well for me. This means that you do one thing at a time. So when you are editing a brief for a matter, you aren't also answering phone calls or checking email. To be better at single tasking, you need to create an environment conducive to it. So turn off notifications on your phone and computer, close any unnecessary tabs on your internet browser, and keep your workspace organized. You may also want to set time limits for how long you work on certain tasks so that you're not distracted by other things. Also, don't underestimate your time. Underestimating your time can happen for two reasons. First, if you're not keeping consistent records of your task, you may forget tasks, like phone calls you've completed. This omission will make it appear you spent less time on a matter than you did. The other reason for underestimating time is that sometimes new lawyers think they should be faster at a task than they are. So if you're feeling this way, talk to your manager instead of getting in your head about your speed and your pace, and ask them what amount of time they expect tasks to take. Also, break down your entries. As for the billing entries, divide the tasks into separate entries to make sense of the cost of the time. For example, if a bill is for review and preparation of draft medical documentation, the client may not understand why this charge required so much time. So it's a good idea to break down your entries and then provide the client with an explanation as to why the task is beneficial to their case. Also, itemize your bills. Start noting the time breakdown of your tasks and activities on your bills. Itemizing your bills will help you avoid block billing. And then tracking your time diligently and detailed with a law firm CRM can add administrative time to your workday, but the lasting value is that you won't have to go back and recreate a day or a week's worth of billable time, which would be nearly impossible to do accurately. So keep in mind, you have a responsibility to your clients, which is why effective time management practices are so important. And I hope that these tips can help ensure that you maintain professionalism in all aspects of your practice and also create transparency with your clients. So with that, I'm going to transition now to talk about the ethical rules that encourage good time management skills. Beyond the business and malpractice risks of poor time management, good organization and time management skills seem to be required to meet lawyers' ethical duties. A lawyer's duty to exercise good time management skills in professional matters is addressed by the ABA's Model Rules of Professional Conduct that have been adopted by most state bars. Rule 1.3 on diligence addresses time management skills when it states, a lawyer shall act with reasonable diligence and promptness in representing a client. Comment 2 to Rule 1.3 provides a lawyer's workload must be controlled so that each matter can be handled competently. This comment highlights a big challenge for lawyers as demonstrated in the Nettleton case we just discussed. To comply, a lawyer will need to exercise effective time management skills in things like managing priorities on multiple projects, tracking and meeting deadlines, correctly estimating the time required for each task and matter that the lawyer takes on, even turning away work when the lawyer should know that they do not have adequate time to promptly complete it. Comment 3 to this rule warns lawyers to avoid procrastination because a client's interests often can be adversely affected by the passage of time or the change in conditions. The comment recognizes that in extreme instances, when a lawyer overlooks a statute of limitations or the lawyer doesn't complete a change to a will before the client dies, the client's legal position may be damaged. As we previously discussed, time delays are a leading driver of malpractice claims and disciplinary complaints. Pick up any issue of your State Bar Journal that describes disciplinary complaints, and you will see how often diligence is a factor. It's in most of them. In fact, I recently read there was a case out of D.C. in which an extremely experienced criminal attorney who had practiced law for more than 40 years, tried over 1,000 cases, was found by the disciplinary board to be incompetent. The attorney took on 2 murder cases pro bono at the request of a judge seeking a veteran who would be able to navigate himself through the tons of documents and complicated issues presented by a multi-co-defendant case. Despite the many trials under his belt, this skilled litigator was unprepared on the day of trial. So what happened? Well, he admitted that he was quite overwhelmed with his current workload and that despite several pretrial conferences in which the judge asked for assurances of readiness, he had not told the court and the prosecutor that he was unprepared. So after 40 years of reputable practice, he was publicly censured for his lack of preparedness. And lack of preparation is one aspect of incompetence that's set forth in Rule 1.1. So next let's talk about communications under Rule 1.4. So Rule 1.4 on communication requires that a lawyer shall promptly inform the client of any decision or circumstance that requires the client's informed consent. So we need to keep a client reasonably informed about the status of a matter. We also need to promptly comply with reasonable requests for information, among other things. And the word promptly is used twice in this rule about communication, so I think it makes it pretty clear that for communication to be effective, according to the rule, it should also be prompt. To me, the most compelling comment to the rule is comment 4, which states, a lawyer's regular communication with clients will minimize the occasions on which a client will need to request information concerning the representation. In my view, if a client ever has to ask what is going on in their case, you have a serious communication failure. Be the bearer of all news, good news, bad news, even indifferent. Be communicative on everything about their case. Never make the client have to call and ask what is going on in their case. Believe me, it's never a good sign when they have to call and ask. Sometimes that will mean calling to say something like, the case cannot progress because the judge is tied up in a big trial, or we're waiting for this witness to be available for deposition. They may not like the news, but they expect that you will take the initiative to keep them posted without them having to call you. When we keep them posted, clients usually don't blame you for the adverse developments. So I think a best practice tip regarding this rule is, even if there's nothing going on because you're in a holding pattern, relay this to the client so they know that you are still working on their case. And then finally, the last rule that we're going to quickly cover is Rule 3.2 of the Model Rule that requires that a lawyer shall make reasonable efforts to expedite litigation consistent with the interest of the client. The comments recognize that a lawyer may occasionally be permitted to request a delay for personal reasons. However, a lawyer cannot routinely fail to expedite litigation solely for their own convenience. As we already discussed, when clients complain to a disciplinary board, it's frequently about the lawyer's failure to act diligently. Members of the public do not need to be familiar with the professional conduct rules to understand that there is something unprofessional about a lawyer's failure to move the representation forward. What may be less apparent to the public is that in addition to the duty to the client, the lawyer also has an ethical obligation to the system to expedite litigation. Like a failure to act with diligence in representing the client, the lawyer's failure to expedite litigation can result in the lawyer being disciplined for unprofessional conduct. The lawyer's obligation to act with diligence as it relates to the client is set out in Rule 1.3, which we just discussed. The ethical obligation to act with diligence, however, extends beyond the lawyer's obligation to the client. Less well known and perhaps less understood is the lawyer's obligation as an officer of the legal system to expedite litigation. The lawyer's duty in this regard is set out in this rule, and the rule requires that a lawyer shall make reasonable efforts to expedite litigation consistent with the interest of the client. While disciplinary matters involving violations of Rule 1.3 occasionally involve violations of 3.2 as well, the obligations imposed by the rules are different. And the comment to Rule 3.2 illustrates this by highlighting the fact that it is the system that may be harmed by the lawyer's failure to expedite litigation. So with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Meg to talk about some great tips on time management. So Meg, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Erin. So now we're going to basically do a deep dive into that element of time management under the rubric of procrastination. So a couple basic definitions, postponing something that you know in your heart should be done now instead of later. It's also a way to deal with the anxiety associated with completing a task or decision. And as the various ethics rules that Erin mentioned, procrastination can be a huge problem for lawyers. So some causes of procrastination are fear of failure, fear of success, perfectionism, indecisiveness. You don't like the task, so you don't want to tolerate the unpleasantness. Maybe you're not clear about what goal you want to accomplish. Maybe you're fatigued because there's an imbalance of work and play. So whenever you find yourself procrastinating on anything, before you dive into a technique that's specifically anti-procrastination, kind of do a mental scan and say, what's the real problem here? Is it really me just not starting for my own psychological reasons, or is there some external circumstance that I can fix? Like, is my office cluttered? Do I have to work to get to my work? So instead of focusing on anti-procrastination, let me spend some time decluttering my office. Similarly, in the example that Erin mentioned about the client taking on a case that was outside his area of expertise, culminating in that dusty, guilt-ridden file on his credenza, the problem there is not really procrastination, it is lack of expertise. So how do you deal with that? You consult an expert or bring on an expert rather than focusing on procrastination. So it's important to know that you can't get the correct answer to the wrong question. So make sure it really is procrastination that's the issue. But if it is, I have 10 tips that I will share with you to deal with procrastination. Some are immediate and concrete and straightforward, and some are a little more nuanced. So here we go. Tip number 1, start anywhere. Don't waste time figuring out what's the best place to start because, in so many situations, there is no one best place to start. Just get started, see how it goes, and just the fact that you've broken that inertial barrier, you will see other things that need to be done. So give yourself maybe a little time to figure out where you are, but then just dive in. Tip number 2, and I will admit, as Erin said, we're all works in progress, and I use variations of this all the time. Think of working in just 15-minute increments. Now, there's nothing magic about the 15-minute amount. You can say 25 minutes, which is sort of the Pomodoro technique, if you're familiar with that. It can be 10 minutes, it can be 5 minutes, it can be 3 minutes, it can be 2 minutes. It doesn't matter how long it is, as long as you have a definite, short time period in mind. Set a timer. I'll continue with the 15 minutes for purposes of this illustration. So set a timer for 15 minutes and tell yourself just for the next 15 minutes you will work on whatever it is you've been procrastinating on because you can do anything for 15 minutes. It's not that long. But it is long enough to actually get something done. The trick comes into play when the timer goes off. At that instant, force yourself to make a binary decision. Either stop, walk away. Your commitment to yourself was 15 minutes and you fulfilled it. Or say, it wasn't so bad. I think I'll go for another 15 minutes and reset the timer. What what this technique does, and somebody called it almost like a snooze alarm. It's using the intermittent deferral principle in the positive sense. What this does is it helps you resist the temptation to stop at the instant you feel like stopping. So let's say in the middle of the 15-minute increment, you want to break it off, say, nope, let me just keep going until the timer goes off. And I know people who end up using this technique who end up working for hours at a time, but had they known in advance they'd be working for hours at a time, there's no way they would have started. But if you think just in terms of 15-minute increments, it becomes much more palatable and much more doable. Tip number 3, and this is kind of a bigger picture idea, and that is to get very clear in your own mind just what is on your plate. And I'm sure we've all heard this forever, make a to-do list. But I don't want to just repeat that without explaining just why it's so important. Because the key time management question is always, what's the best use of my time right now? But if you ask yourself that without having some sort of task management system to help you answer it, logically and efficiently, you'll find yourself just bouncing around doing whatever appeals to you whenever you ask that question. So think of your to-do system, your task management system, as the written form of the answer to that crucial question, what's the best use of my time? So the format of the system is practically irrelevant. You can do it by hand. You can do it. There are numerous iPhone apps. I'm sure there are sections of it built into your case management system, and you can use different elements for different parts of your to-dos. Maybe case-related things are in your case management system, and everything else is in another system. As long as it's somewhere and you're clear as to where it is, that's part of your task management system. And I recommend people visualize your task management system as basically a pyramid. So visualize a pyramid, divide the pyramid into 3 vertical layers. The lowest layer, which is the biggest layer, consists of basically everything. And I recommend keep an everything list. And by list, I mean database or element in your task management system. And that's where you put everything that you want to do, want to think about doing, want to consider doing in your work, in all your pro bono stuff, in your administrative stuff, in your life outside of work. It really is everything. And a lot of people freak out when I make this suggestion. And then I underscore, just because you put something into this system is not a commitment to doing it. It's merely a commitment to reviewing this on a regular basis and using this to prioritize and winnow what you want to do next. So you do this offload, you get everything into this everything list, and then periodically, about every week or so, that's a good time frame, go through that everything list and pull out the things you want to focus on this week. And here I recommend being limited about it. Within the everything list, you should have all your project-specific lists, and you should cut your projects down into manageable chunks. And then in the weekly list, you just pull up the elements of that project list that you want to get done this week, but it should be the equivalent of no more than what would fit on about 1 page if you were doing this like in a Word document. So we're talking about, what's that, 2 dozen to 2.5 dozen specific tasks, depending on how long they take, of course. Now, if you say, well, wait a minute, that's not going to work for me, Meg, because I've got 3 pages worth of things I need to get done this week, I would say, okay, Fred, if that's your name, choose the 1 page worth of the most important things, and when you've completed that, you can always go back and add more, because a key element of time management is realizing there is no such thing as time management. You don't manage time. You manage yourself with respect to time. So because it's self-management, there's a huge element of kind of adjusting your mindset and trying to view things so it's less stressful rather than more stressful. And isn't it less stressful to start the week with 1 page worth of things you want to do, and then if you finish it by, Wednesday midday, where we are now in the week, you add more. You're kind of ahead of where you would have been if you'd started the week with 3 pages. Does it really make a difference? I think it does, because it's more palatable. It's less overwhelming. So that's your weekly list, no more than 1 page. And then each day, you look at just that 1 page weekly list, ignore your everything list, except when you look at it to create your weekly list and when you add things to your everything list. So look at that one-page weekly list and say, what small handful of things do I want to get done today? And of course, you look at your calendar to see how much actual time you have to do this kind of work each day. But even if you have nothing else in your calendar, I recommend starting off your day with no more than 6, tough love here, items on your daily list. And if you say, but Meg, there are a dozen things I need to get done today, I would say, okay, Bob, if that's your name, put down the 6 most important items. And if you're done with that, you can always go back and add more. So this is kind of prioritizing an action. Now, you do want to prioritize your daily list. Don't prioritize your weekly list. Don't prioritize the everything list. But actually prioritize that 6-item daily list. And that's your map, your roadmap, unless an emergency arises. Now, all organizational systems consist of 2 components, the actual tool and then the habit of using the tool effectively. The habit of using this prioritized daily to-do list effectively is to do what I call honoring the to-do list. Honoring the to-do list means you stick with the list in the order that you've prioritized it unless circumstances change sufficient to justify going off the list or revising the list. And circumstances can change in every way. You get that, call from your kid's school, or someone, breaks a leg or something, and your number one task is heading off to the ER, in which case the daily list is kind of a placeholder for when you can turn back to it. Or let's say it's also a change in circumstance. If you ask yourself that key time management question, what's the best use of my time right now? And if the true honest answer is, I think the best use of my time is to, take a break and take advantage of the fact that I'm still working from home and go outside and walk around the block for 15 minutes. As long as you pause and ask yourself, do I really think this and I'm not just goofing off, that's still honoring the to-do list. So it is infinitely flexible. And the focus should be to figure out what time you want to devote to work each day and then to honor the to-do list during that time you've decided to devote to work. Now that is actually doable no matter what happens. So honoring the to-do list is not the same as completing the list. And believe it or not, honoring it is more important. A client of mine put it this way once. She said, "It is not my job to complete every single item on my to-do list. It is my job to make judgments about the relative priority of the items on the list and to be responsible for those judgments." So that's basically the to-do list pyramid. And I love the analogy or metaphor, whichever it is, of the pyramid, because the apex of the pyramid is a single point. And this goes back to what Erin was saying, which is you want to try to single task because you only can focus on one thing at any given moment. So the apex of the pyramid, it's buttressed by everything else you plan to do, but you've decided that one thing at the tip of the pyramid is what is appropriate to focus on at the moment. And that's actually the only thing that you can procrastinate on. If you're not doing something else, you're just doing good priorities. So moving on to tip number 4. It's very important to be clear in your own mind kind of what it is you need to do. So creating the to-do list pyramid is one helpful way. Another way is to kind of think big picture when you can and to set SMART goals. SMART is the acronym for make the goals specific, articulate exactly what it is you want to accomplish, and actually write this down somewhere because, as I think we all know, forcing yourself to write it down, whether it's by hand or electronically, forces you to be concrete and specific in a way that just thinking about it doesn't require. Make sure your goal is measurable so you can tell for sure that you've reached your goal. So if one of your goals is to get more organized, getting organized is very kind of mushy, so make it specific. You will declutter this element of your office, or you will set up this part of your everything list. You want it to be activity-oriented. Focus on what you can do rather than on the external results, because you want to be able to figure out, what actually can you do, because you only get to the final result when you've done the task you need to do to get there. R stands for reasonable. The goals should be actually reachable, so they inspire you rather than overwhelming you. And finally, they should be time limited. Since work tends to fill the time available, set a specific deadline for when you want to reach the goals. Now, if you go through this process, and there are roughly a gazillion goal-setting prompts and apps online out there, you'll probably come up with far too many goals and you have a lifetime in which to do them. But I think it's a good idea to keep track of your back burner goals so that if you need to fill in a goal when you've achieved it, you can do that. But also figuring out what's on the front burner and what's on the back burner is just another exercise in prioritization because we can't do everything. So it's important to take the time to figure out that we're doing the things that are most important for us. Tip number 5, one of the reasons we procrastinate is that we get distracted by worry and anxiety. So here are some tips for dealing with that. This may sound weird, but you never know what resonates. Designate specific worry times, like from 55 after the hour until the hour. Those 5 minutes are devoted to worry, during which time you just worry your pretty little head off. But when the time's over, that's when you back burner the worries and get back to work. Actually write down what your worries are. What would you advise a friend who came to you with exactly this problem? Another one is to figure out, what are you worrying about? Make a list of all your worries. And the reason I'm laughing is I always say it's amazing that we worry about things that usually never happen, and the things that we end up worrying about, we never could have foreseen. And the reason I'm laughing about this is, who would have imagined a few years ago when we were worried about, pandemic and vaccines and all of that, and this week we're worrying about, what's that unidentified object up in the sky that somebody needs to shoot down? So, who knows? So the point is, why bother worrying about it? Because it's, things are going to come out of left field next time anyway. Maybe pay a little attention to it and then kind of say, okay, that's what it is. I'm going to stick my head in the sand and focus on my work and worry about it a bit later. It's also very helpful to focus on what, if anything, you can do rather than worry about things that you have absolutely no control about. So ask yourself, what can I do? What's under my influence? But if it's completely beyond your influence or control, that's when you want to adopt what I call the Scarlett O'Hara approach, which says, I'll think about it tomorrow, because what's the point about worrying about something you can't do anything about? Try to use strategic ignorance, which is a very valuable mental state. And I also want to flip procrastination on its head, because if you're listening to this, you're probably good at procrastinating, so why don't you apply procrastinating to procrastinating on worry, saying, I will think about it tomorrow. Tip number 6, as I mentioned before, it's embracing strategic ignorance, but it's doing it rather methodically by deciding to actively avoid news and social media except for when you specifically plan to do it to learn the basics. So, come up with whatever time frames work right for you. But I used to be completely addicted to the news and the latest breaking everything. And now I figure, if something major happens, I'm sure I'll hear about it in plenty of time. And the time when you kind of wall yourself off can be a very weirdly mentally relaxing kind of time period, because all you need to focus on is your work. And if you can really get into your work, and I'm segueing now to tip number 7, aiming to get into that flow state in your work, that actually can be a really good respite from your worries. So just try to lose yourself in your work, because have you ever worked on something that's maybe a little challenging, maybe a little different, and it's actually kind of satisfying to get into it and figure it out and actually, draft something and have it work. And that's kind of what you want to aim for, to look for that satisfaction in your work. Some eternal optimists will say happiness in your work, and if that works for you, terrific, but I want to be realistic here. Let's say satisfaction. Aim for that and temporarily try to forget everything else. Tip number 8, you want to give yourself some structure. You don't want to be highly regimented. I certainly agree with what Erin mentioned before, which is to give yourself, maybe to put on your calendar time to work with certain files and to plan to do that. And I think that can be very helpful as long as you leave the flexibility in case an emergency arises or in case circumstances change. But what can also be helpful is to kind of simultaneously be the subject and the scientist, and try to figure out what's a good basic daily routine that works for me, given my own circumstances and inclinations. I'm definitely not recommending a hard and fast schedule that you have to cling to by your fingertips with, teeth gritted, but just try to come up with, I like the routine approach instead of schedule, because as I see it, a routine is more, okay, first I do this, and then I do that, and next I do the other, whereas a schedule is, I do this at this time, and then I do that at that time. And we all know that that's not the way that we work. That's not the way the world works. But if you come up with a basic routine, so you get up and you make your coffee and exercise, whatever it is you do, and then segue into your work, and then alternate between working sessions for a couple hours and maybe take a quick break, especially if you're one of those people who is working part-time or full-time still at home. Figuring out kind of what's more productive time for you. Are you a morning person or an afternoon person? How does the rhythm of your day work? And just to give you kind of a starting point, let me tell you my ending point after I performed this grand experiment on myself. I'm laughing at myself because I came up with something that people have known for centuries. As it turned out, I realized that I kind of followed sort of a 3-hour chunk. I mean, I'd work for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then it would either be time for a meal or time for a break or time for exercise or time for something else. So pretty much I'd reset, at 9 and then at noon and then at 3 and then at 6. And that's just kind of how it worked out. And then I thought, why does that sound strangely familiar? And I dug deep into my brain and did a little Googling, and I realized that I reinvented the monks Benedict, the rule of Saint Benedict, kind of how monks tended to order their time. But the thing is, I think that just shows that's kind of how human beings and human brains tend to work, because the idea is to come up with this routine, come up with these rituals, so you don't have to decide each moment, okay, exactly what do I do next? I heard someone describe this really well, that it's wonderful to be on autopilot if you're the one that designed the autopilot system, because it is such a strain to always be making the big level decisions, but make the big level decisions in how you set up your structure, and then what you do each day is follow the structure, maybe making a note here and there for, well, next time I revise the structure, let me tweak this here and tweak that there, but I'm not going to revise it today. I'm going to stick with it and see how it goes. And the idea is respect the schedule. The aim is to, take enough breaks so you achieve a sustainable pace. So you either take breaks before you need it, which is one approach, or you push the envelope and take breaks when you really, really need it, which is another approach. I think both of them can work at different times. What also is helpful is setting boundaries. And I mentioned earlier about honoring the to-do list during the time you've decided it's appropriate to work. So especially if you're still working from home, but even if you're working at the office or at WeWork or at anywhere, figure out what is my work time today. And it may not be the same each day, and it may not be the same each week, but start each day knowing what your work time is, knowing what your end time will be, absent some huge, definite, real emergency, not just because you've been procrastinating. Because if you look forward to that end time, and the time after the end time is when you devote to rest, relaxation, your life outside of work, planning that and looking forward to that is actually part of your overall strategy to work well during the time that's appropriate to work. And it's so important to set these boundaries and to try to do your best to honor those boundaries, especially if you're still working from home, because if you don't, it stops being working from home and living at work. And the only way to set the boundaries is to decide in your own mind to do that, because ultimately it's the permission you give yourself to do that, knowing that the ultimate goal is to keep yourself in the best possible shape so that you could do the best possible work for your employer, for your clients. So tip number 9, segueing to this, which means you want to prioritize self-care. And again, I have to laugh because I've been teaching these seminars now for many years. It's only in recent years we're calling it self-care, but it's all the same thing. The idea is it's hard to do good work when you're not feeling well. So it's reasonable to give yourself permission to take the time to take care of yourself. And most of us are in the privileged position that really is the primary limitation. We feel we shouldn't, so we don't. But ultimately, if you get burned out or you get tired or you don't feel well, it's time to maybe reassess whether it does make sense to do that, to give yourself enough time to get a reasonable amount of exercise, because it's hard for your brain to work well when your body isn't working well, the brain being part of the body. Making sure you have adequate rest, ideally aiming for the goal of getting up each morning without an alarm, which is a harbinger that you are getting enough sleep. So that's a good thing to aim for. Good nutrition. I think this decade we're calling it meal planning, if you want to do that. Just so most of the time you eat relatively healthy so that you feel relatively well, a good investment of time. And finally, you really want to plan for and honor your leisure time, knowing that you only have a certain amount of time to work and a certain amount of fun to look forward to will help you be more productive when you're during the time you've allocated to work. Business philosopher Jim Rohn once said, "When you work, work. When you play, play. Play is sweet only when you've really worked." And I think it was also Jim Rohn who said, "Wherever you are, be there." And what that means is when you're working, try to forget about everything else you're worried about and focus on work. But alternatively, when you're not in work, when you're with your family, and by which I include, your dog, when you're not working, try to be there as well. Really want to recharge your batteries, recharge your brain, which is part of the overall plan to take care of yourself so you can do your best work. So the last thing I really want to focus on is a multi-part approach for overcoming chronic procrastination. I divide procrastination into two kinds. There's the chronic procrastination, which I'll just talk about, and I speak, by the way, as a recovered chronic procrastinator, so I know whereof I speak in that. The other kind of procrastination is something many of us may come up with right about this time of year during tax season, which is, it's not that we're big procrastinators, it's just low tolerance for unpleasantness. If that's the kind of procrastination you're dealing with, the low tolerance for unpleasantness, the 15-minute increment technique will take you a long way. But if you've been a lifelong procrastinator, maybe you want to do a deeper dive, and this is how you do it. Basically, there are 5 different elements of what's known as the procrastination mindset. And you may not think in exactly these words, but you'll tend to think something with these meanings. So be aware of what the procrastination mindset is, and when you find yourself thinking of one of them, try to replace it with the producer mindset. And I'll walk through all 5 elements. And how you replace it is you just acknowledge this, what you're thinking, and then just repeat to yourself, mentally or maybe out loud, what the producer mindset is. And the first element is procrastinators tend to think, I must, I gotta, I don't want to, but I have to do this. Now, I will make the argument that you don't have to do anything. You may think you do, but anything that you do, I guarantee you someone has faced a similar situation and has ultimately not done it. There are, and it can be egregious. I mean, there are parents who don't care for their children. There will be people who don't pay or file their taxes coming up. Anything you feel you have to do, you really don't have to do it as long as you're willing to deal with the consequences of not doing it. And sometimes the consequences of not doing something are so egregious, we lose sight of the fact that it really is a choice. But if you remind yourself, no, it really is a choice, what that does is it puts you back in the driver's seat, and you don't feel that someone's forcing you to do anything against your better judgment. So every time you think, I must, I gotta, I don't want to, but I have to do this, kind of back up and say, you know what, I really don't have to if I want to deal with the consequence, but I don't want to deal with the consequence, thank you very much. So yes, in that sense, it is my choice, so I choose to do this. Now let me get down to work. The second element of the procrastinator mindset is the procrastinator tends to think, I have to finish. I have to get it done. Got to get it filed. Got to get it off my desk. And while this may be literally true, if you want to move on to the next element, the problem with focusing on finishing when you're procrastinating is it's premature, because you cannot finish when you haven't even started. So if you find yourself focusing on finishing, especially legal work, because the finish line is so ephemeral, you never know when you're done. You can always wordsmith something until kingdom come. I think it was novelist Truman Capote who once said, I never finished a book. They just took it away from me. So instead of thinking of finishing, focus instead on starting. Starting is immediate. Starting is concrete. Say, when can I start? The next element of the procrastinator mindset is looking at the forest, not the trees. This project is huge. How can I ever get it done? And here's where you want to go back and build that everything list and actually create a very detailed to-do list listing every single individual task you need to do for the project, and then focus on one small task. And once you do that, you realize that that is the only way to do large projects, because you can never work on the whole entire thing at once. You literally can only work on one small element, that one small task that is at the point of the apex of the to-do list pyramid. So you might as well identify that and realize that that task is doable. You may freak out about the whole project and be anxious about it all, but researching one issue, that you can do. Figuring out who's an expert on, on this particular crime, so I can, call them, that's doable. So figure out what the small task is and then do that. The next element of the procrastinator mindset is perfectionism. Procrastinators feel that everything has to be so good, so perfect. They paint themselves into the intellectual corner known as the paralysis of perfectionism. They're so afraid it won't be perfect, they don't get started, so it's not wrong. It's not there at all. So reverse that and say, I can be human, and I will acknowledge that I know I will make mistakes along the way when I do this project, but my goal is to do them early, do them often, catch them in time, fix them, and not force myself to work, to create, without giving myself permission to, be human and make those errors as long as I can fix them. So give yourself the flexibility to do that. You can be human. Don't force yourself to be perfect, especially when you're at the beginning of a project procrastinating on it. The final element of the procrastination mindset is thinking, okay, I'll have time for rest, fun, relaxation. I think that's a good idea, Meg, and I will do that, but only once I finish working on this current project. Basically, you're procrastinating on fun, rest, and relaxation. So try to flip that around and say, I choose to make time for reasonable rest, fun, and relaxation, no matter how busy I am. Reasonable, of course, not saying take the day off when you have a deadline, but the idea is you don't want to put off living. You don't want to procrastinate on living, because what that means, if you clear the decks so you can always be working, that's a very enervating, draining way to look at life. You need something fun to look forward to in order to keep your juices flowing to do the work. So actually turn to your calendar, plug in what the psychologist who came up with this analysis called guilt-free play, which you will honor no matter how little you get done, so you have something good to look forward to. So taking all 5 of these together, instead of saying what procrastinators say, I must finish this huge project perfectly with no time for fun, rest, and relaxation. Instead, you're saying, I choose to start on one small task in a human manner, looking forward to binge watching the next 3 episodes of that Netflix show that I'm watching. And it's obvious which one will have you sitting down and actually getting things to work. So having said that, those are the 10 tips. And now we'll hand it back over to Michelle to go for questions. And Erin and I will do our best to provide the answers.
Thank you so much, Meg. Great presentation. Very helpful information. We're getting lots of good comments and compliments on the program overall. Any suggestions for how to deal with a client that abuses the willingness and availability of their lawyer to communicate? For example, starts to message the lawyer more frequently and leaves voice messages after hours for a callback.
Yeah, and Meg, I can grab this one since I talked about the ethics rules related to communication. I think the best advice to give is set expectations out of the gate, right? I think at the beginning of the representation, you should have a very candid conversation with your clients about communication. You need to find out how they want to get information from you. You can say things like, this is typically how often I will report. Does that work for you? Or ask them, what form of communication and reporting would you like? And then also explain that there are going to be times that there may not be anything happening in their case because you're in that holding pattern. So I think if you set these expectations out of the gate, it certainly can help with these types of clients. But keep in mind, it goes both ways. If you understand the goals or the expectations of the client when it comes to communication, and then you would try to accomplish them, you'll be much more successful if you understand what their expectations are. And if the client understands the goals and expectations that you have, then you can help avoid a situation in which they're constantly contacting you, especially outside of office hours or even when you're on vacation, and when there may not be really anything to report. So I also would recommend setting aside office hours for calls. Other than for an emergency, and make sure they understand what a real emergency is, you can say things like, the best time to reach me is during these times when I'm most likely not in court or handling, other cases. But again, I think it's really about setting expectations so the client isn't feeling neglected and forgotten, because that's where you get into trouble with communication.
Should your to-do list include personal care items, for example, working out, vacation, etc.?
Ooh, this is Meg. I'll jump in and handle that if you don't mind, Erin. My opinion is that yes, it absolutely should, especially since it's important to view your to-do list not as a commitment of everything you absolutely have to do, come what may, but as a list of options from which to choose how best to use your time. Because the whole idea of time management is hopefully we're dealing with long time frames, but it's not infinite. That's where we get the term deadline. And the idea is to be confident that you are doing your best to use your time consistent with what you think is appropriate for you. And what that means is, brainstorm what's important to me, what do I want to do on vacation, and certainly I'm a huge fan of adequate exercise. It's just absolutely crucial for every possible reason. And also use it to include notes and ideas. And as long as I mentioned vacation, I saw this recently in the paper, and I've long realized this. There are different kinds of vacations. There's a relaxation and just lie around and read and basically really rejuvenate kind of vacations. And then there's hopping on a plane and going to a new country and sightseeing. And there's that kind of vacation. There's travel. So be clear in your own mind which it is that you want, and especially if you're vacationing with others, have a discussion about what kind of vacation you're talking about. So it's interesting because this is applying the understand your mutual expectations element that Erin just mentioned in answer to the first question. But yes, I think it's always a good idea to be as concrete and expansive as possible in what it is you plan to do with this limited amount of time that we all have.
What is the best way to handle 100 plus emails per day?
I think Erin's going to let me take that one, so I'll take it. I'm going to come at it in two approaches. One is be sure that all of those 100 emails really should be coming to you. If maybe you've been left on a CC list or some distribution list you shouldn't have been on, be ruthless about staying on them. But let's say they are all legitimate emails. My basic approach for dealing with email is processing the email is a key part of your job. You need to process the information inflow, but you also need to actually get some substantive work done. And what I suggest is to kind of alternate, toggle between that, and the length of time and the frequency of the toggle will depend on the kind of, what's on your plate and the kind of work that you do. But the idea is, process the email, by which I mean look at everything, figure out, is it a quick answer you can do right away? Is it something you don't need to answer at all, in which case you file it away? Or is it something major and substantive that you need to add something to your to-do list, so you add that to your to-do list? If you want to be responsive, you shoot an email back saying, got it, I'm on it, so they know you're alive and well. But then you recalibrate your to-do list, taking into account what's come in through the email, and then you prioritize, and then you focus on number one and getting that done. And then you kind of come out of that and check the email and process the email and recalibrate the to-do list again. And so basically that process is the same no matter how many emails there are, but what's important is there's the organization aspect that you're dealing with it well, but then there's also the quantity aspect, and if you have so much on your plate that is unwieldy, then you need to look at the bigger picture, and either you're the lawyer yourself and say, have I taken on too much work and I need to cut back, or talk to your manager and say, look, this is just, unreasonable expectations, and deal with it that way. So it's not always how you're managing it, it's stepping back and looking at the bigger picture as well. But that's, in a nutshell, that's my advice about that.
couple more questions. We'll try to get to at least one or two more. Diligence requires a client who responds in a timely manner. How does a lawyer best deal with a client who won't complete the work necessary to move a case forward?
I can take this one, Meg, since it relates to diligence, which I spoke a little bit about. And this is a great question because we see this a lot. First, my advice is document all your efforts in writing. Make sure they make their way into the file in case there is a dispute later on about your diligence, and it's your word against the client's word. So that would be my first piece of advice. And then my second one is, this is really why client screening is really important, right? We work with lawyers after dealing with unresponsive clients, and then they tell us, oh, I knew this client was going to be trouble, or I knew I shouldn't have taken this case. And what this says to me is that your firm needs to do a better job screening potential clients. If in the first meeting that you notice that they're reluctant to answer basic questions or they're providing inconsistent or incomplete information, be smart. Don't ignore these red flags or that gut feeling telling you don't take on this client. So screening is really, really important. Also, your engagement letter should outline the responsibilities of the attorney and the client so they do know what's expected of them. Explain the process, what's expected of the client as far as document production, interrogatories, depositions, all of that stuff should be in there. Because if you are upfront with the client about what is expected of them and what's expected of you, you have it in writing. If there is any dispute at a later date, you at least have this agreement to hang your hat on. And if you're looking for more tips on client screening, we have a whole article on it called Spring Cleaning, and it goes through what you should be looking for as far as screening potential clients. So if you're looking for more information on client screening, there is an article on our website under Protect Your Practice tab that could provide some more information and resources.
Great information, Erin. At this time, we will conclude today's events. On behalf of Attorney Protective, I would like to thank all of you for joining us for today's webinar. Special thanks to our speakers, Erin and Meg. Fabulous presentation. Everyone have a wonderful day.